Good morning. Welcome to
Boker
Daf
Tov, how are you?
Boker Tov. It's clear enough. I'm still a little under the weather. We'll get over the weather. So today's daf in Masechet Bava Batra, we're getting there. We're getting close to the end of this parak and closer to the end of the Masechet, is today's Kuf Lamed Chet, 138. And I'm going to go back. We did it last night together, but let's just read the last few lines on Kuf Lamed Zayin Amabet so that we can get into the sugya from the beginning. So 4 lines from the bottom says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Hakotev nechasav la'acher. If a person writes that they want to give their possessions after they die, or even when they're alive, to somebody else, the Omer Hala, and the other person says, Ef Shibahem, no thank you, I don't want them. Kana, it still goes to the other person. Va'afilo omed v'tzavach. Even if the person's standing there and shouting and saying, I don't want it, I don't want it, it still goes to that person. That was what Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel said. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no way, lo kana, in that case, if you don't want it, you don't get it. It said Amar Rab Abba Bar Mama yesterday, which is obvious ultimately. Lo pligi, they don't really disagree, meaning there is no real opinion that you can force someone to take a gift from you if if the person doesn't want it. The question really here is when the person stated that they didn't want it. Kan, the case where we say that Rabbi Yochanan said that it's not a gift is b'tzavach meikara, when basically he started screaming, protesting right away. So he said, no, thank you. I don't want the gift. I'm not taking it. I'm not accepting it. There's no question that it's not his. But kan b'shotek meikara b'tzavach. The case of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel is where actually he was quiet initially. He accepted the gift, we say. And then he later says, I don't want this. We assume he changed his mind for whatever reason. He saw what it was. He was afraid people were going to start hounding him for money. Whatever reason someone wouldn't want a gift, right? He only came to that realization after the fact, and then he can give it away, right? But he can't decline the gift once he's already quietly accepted it. Now, Amr of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, however, the case is, and this is where we stopped yesterday, second line now, Zika lo ayidei acher. Let's say, which is often happens, the Reuven, let's say, who's dying or giving away his stuff, wants to give it to Shimon, but Shimon is sitting there in front of him, but he gives it to him through somebody else. Meaning he gives a shtar, let's say, or he does a kinyan sudar with Levi, and says, Levi, I want through this kinyan to give over my properties to Shimon. Okay, and so Zika lo ayidei acher, he transfers it, he gives a schut to it to Shimon through somebody else. Vishatak, and Shimon is sitting there. Let's say he's aware of it, and he's quiet. Right? So he doesn't stop, he doesn't say, wait a second, I don't want this. But he wasn't involved, he was just an observer. Ulibisof tzavach. But then later, well, I guess when it came time, the bank called him up and said, okay, we're ready to transfer ownership. He said, no, thanks, I have no interest in this. There, it's not so simple. There, it's a machloket tanaim. Banu the machloket Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel of Rabbanan. That, in fact, is similar to the machloket we're about to have in a brayta of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Rabbanan. The Tanya. What is this brayta? Oh, wow. Good morning, Rosa. The Breita says, we are on Daf Kuflam and Chet Amin Aleph, the Tanya, which is 5 lines from the top. Sorry, I'm doing this all on my computer. The Tanya, as the Breita says, Hakotev nechasav la'acher. A person is, and we've had these cases all parak, right? Person is dying and he says, I want to give my possessions to somebody else. And we talked earlier, that happens. Again, there's many different ways it can happen. It can be from now, after I die, when I die. That's not relevant for our discussion today, or at least not now. The point here is Hayabahen Avadim. Included in this estate that Shimon got from his nice friend Ruvain were slaves. Va'amar Hala, now Shimon is a abolitionist, and he says, really not the real pshat, he says, Ef Shibahem, I really don't want the slaves. Rashbam and Rishonim understand that, it's a lot of work to have slaves. So, right, you might not, you have to feed them, you have to take care of them. Now they work for you, but you got a lot of responsibility. And to
He doesn't want to feed them, the Rashbam says.
Right.
Zol Avadim.
If you don't have to, right. So it's a little complicated because you don't really have to feed slaves, right? You can tell those slaves, go get your own food. But the point is that, it's a lot of responsibility. You feel you have to feed them. It's embarrassing not to feed them. The bottom line is it's a whole nother level of responsibility that you might not want to be involved in, or you could be against slavery. But either way, he says, I don't want them. So says the Braita, Imhaya Rabban Sheni Kohen. Now let's say the second person, meaning again, Ruvain is saying, I want to give my stuff to Shimon. And Shimon says, I don't want the slaves. Says the Braita, if Shimon is a Kohen, then Harei Elochim b'truma. They are owned by Shimon, meaning he can't refuse it. It's owned by him, and they have all the status of a slave of a Kohen, which is that they are from the house of the Kohen, and they can eat truma. Meaning, even though he says, I don't want them, right? Obviously, again, he could sell them, he can give them away. But until he's done that, it's his. And that's the Tanakh. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, that doesn't make any sense. Kivan shamar hala. Since Shimon said, ef shibahem, I don't want them, kvar zachu behen yorshim. So they basically stay in Reuven's family. Reuven's dead now, so it goes to Reuven's yorshim. So the owner, and assuming Reuven is not a Kohen, the owner of the slaves now is not a Kohen, and they can't eat truma. So that's the Braita.
Don't we say Adam is zacha shelo b'fanav? You give someone the right. Isn't there? I probably didn't say it right, but Adam.
Zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You said
Right.
you're close. Yeah,
Right.
but the question here is this considered a schut, right? There's a principle of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav that you can give someone a gift even if they're not there through somebody else, right? Because you assume they want it. But the question here is this guy is saying, I don't want it, right? So it's not a schut just to give. I mean, if you came over and said, here's $1 million, I might say, I don't want the burden of $1 million. That's no gift to me, right? Because as the Rashbam quotes, sonei matanot yichya, right? There's a beautiful statement that sometimes people don't want to be given gifts and handouts from other people.
Well, Rashbam says this. What's that?
The Rashbam says sonei further up. If you look at the third line of Rashbam, sonei, it's a pasuk in Mishlei, sonei matanot yichya, which is why you might not want a gift.
I've heard that pasuk before.
It's a beautiful pasuk. Anyways, we're not on that topic. But if you're learning Mishlei with 929, which today is the fifth parak of Mishlei, we'll be getting up to it in 2 weeks. So just a little plug.
What are you learning? What do you mean? We're learning Mishlei?
There's a project where people learn one parak of Tanakh every day. The 929 prakim of Tanakh. So that group is currently on Mishlei. Today is I think the fifth parak of Mishlei. So it's coming up. In any event, I don't want to get distracted. So here the Tosefta has a machloket. You gave your nechasav to somebody else. There are slaves. The second person said, I don't want the slaves. The question is, according to Tanakama, they still owns them and they can eat truma. According to Shimon Gamliel, he doesn't own them. Now we asked in the discussion of the Braita, what do you mean? The Tanakama says that they're owned by the second owner, by Shimon, and that they're slaves of Kohanim and they can eat truma. Why? I feel even if he's standing and screaming and saying, I don't want them, right? So why do they still belong to Shimon? Amar Rava, Vitim Rabbi Yochanan, this is where Rava explained in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, or some say Rabbi Yochanan, sorry, Bitzoveach meikara. Look, if you say from the beginning, I don't want this gift, then Kuli Amo lo plika de lo kani. Everybody agrees that the Shimon, who's a Kohen, is not Kona. Ruvain can't force Shimon to accept a gift from him, right? If he says initially, I don't want it, then he's not Kona. And everybody agrees that if you're shatak, if you are quiet and you accept the gift, and then later you say, and later you say, this was a terrible idea, I don't want to have to deal with this, it's your problem now. Everyone agrees that you were Kona and it's your slave and you can sell it. You can get rid of the slave, but you can't retroactively get rid of the gift. Where do they argue? Where do the Tanaim argue? Ki pligi, in a case where there's another party involved, which is a case where you're zikalo ayidei acher vishatak. The Ruvain gave it to Shimon through somebody else, basically. So meaning Ruvain on his deathbed or before his deathbed said here, to Levi, the visitor, and Shimon is in the present. Shimon knows about it, right? And he said to Levi, here, acquire these things for Shimon. I want to give this portion of my estate. Let's say you have 5 portions of your estate. Portion A should go to Shimon. Portion B to go to this person, whatever you say. And you give it through somebody else. And the guy, Shimon, knows about this. And he's shatak, right? Because if he didn't know about it, then obviously it's the first case. It's where you're tzavach meikara. But he knows about it. And he's quiet. Uda besof tzavach. And then when it comes time to distribute the estate, he says, no, I don't really want these slaves. So there, Tanakama savar, what you would assume, he's shatak kinyane. Since he didn't say anything initially, once it was given to Levi, as a kinyan for Shimon, he didn't say anything. It's Shimon's, he can't complain later. But Hai de Katsavach, right, the fact that he's screaming now saying, I don't want it, is Mahadar Kaderbe. He changed his mind. He's regretting his decision, but you can't just change your mind. You've got to go ahead and sell it or do something else about it. So that is the simple explanation. What is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Savar? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel holds that, look, the end, what he did in the end, reveals what he was thinking the whole time. That really, for the fact that when they called him from the bank and said, okay, come pick up your slaves or your property, he said, I don't want it. He never wanted it. So why didn't he protest earlier? Why didn't he protest up to this point? The suffer, because he said, look, as long as it's not coming to my possession, as long as it's not practical, I don't need to make a big deal out of it. This guy, Ruvain's dying, he's trying to give away his things. As long as it's just theoretical, meaning it has not come to me, then I don't need to say anything. And the fact that I was quiet is not acquiescence. It's just that it hasn't become practical yet. When it becomes practical and someone calls me up to say, come take your slaves, or they come to deliver it, that's when I'm going to protest. And so that is a machloket, Mishimon ben Gamliel and Tanakama, and that would be a machloket lahalacha.
Isn't that always the case? The person that he says until it's practical, even in another situation, he says, I'm going to give it to you without a third party. And he said, he doesn't say anything. And then later he changes his mind, but it's still not practical until he actually receives it. Right?
I mean, if he says I'm giving it to you, then the second he says it, it belongs to him.
No, but he didn't actually receive the property or the gift or whatever it might be. He didn't get it until it actually does. He says, I'm going to give it to you. And then 3 weeks later, it shows up. And then he says, oh, no, I didn't really want this. But it practically, he didn't get it until that moment, whether there's a third party or not.
Um, I mean, so I think the difference, according to, at least according to the way we're reading this, is that when there's a third party, you're less confident. You have not done anything to agree. When a person says it to you and you're sitting there, even though you didn't say no, the fact that you didn't, if someone walks over to you and says, "Here, I want to give you a gift," and you say nothing, let's say, then that we consider, according to everybody in argument, at least to be acquiescence. You have an opportunity to protest. And with the third party, although you're there, in theory, you could have protested, it wasn't directed to you, and therefore it's not your kavod, it's not your interest in protesting.
So would the
So,
slave be able to eat truma?
so according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, in that case, the slave can eat truma, right? Sorry, according to the Tanakhama, not Shimon ben Gamliel. According to the Tanakhama, right? The according to Tanakhama, the slave can eat truma, and according to Shimon ben Gamliel, the slave cannot eat truma, because we say that although you were quiet when the other person accepted it, you are complaining, you are making a stink when they first come to you, and therefore that reveals that you didn't want this gift, you truly rejected it, and so you never got the slaves. They stayed in the Rishut of Ruvain. Ruvain died, so they go to Ruvain's Yarshim, and whatever Ruvain's Yarshim are, that's what they can eat.
So they're arguing about when you actually acquire it, right?
No, they're arguing about because presumably again, I was loose about the case. Presumably, it's a case where Ruvain says, "I'm giving it to you after I die." So there's no question that you don't acquire it until Ruvain dies. The question is, what happens when Ruvain dies? Does it go to Shimon or does it go to the estate of Ruvain? Right. So if now I get I guess your point is that in between, if we don't know, you're saying, right?
Right. Well, if he can't eat truma, then he has not acquired it. And the other guy's saying he can eat truma, that means the Kohen has acquired it.
Right. So that's the Tanakhama says they can eat truma, which is a way of saying the Kohen has acquired it even against his desire. But that's what Shimon Gamliel disagrees with. So
Right. Right. So
that's the
that's something. It seems to me they're debating when you actually acquire something.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think it's not. I think they're. You can't acquire it and then give it away, right? I mean, you can. Just to be clear, you can always give something away, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about whether, in fact, you ever acquired it and whether you have to give it away, right? It's another just a side point since I think you raised it. What happens if you do give it away? So the Rashbam actually talks about this earlier. I think either in yesterday's daf or no, today with Reish Lakish he talks about what if Reuven says to Shimon, I want to give this gift to you, and Shimon says I don't want it, and then Reuven dies. Let's say who owns it? Like what happens to the thing? So there's a debate actually about that, whether it doesn't go anywhere, or Rashbam quotes Reish Lakish's opinion in Kritud, I believe, that yeah, he quotes it from Kritud, that it goes to Hefker, basically. So it's basically anyone who wants, the first person who picks it up acquires it. But either way, that's not, it won't go to Hek, it won't go to the Kohen, the owner, the Kohen to give them Truma. Tanu Rabbanan. Now let's
So he doesn't
continue.
know. So, but still, if it would seem that if a person himself says that I don't want it, I think you're fortified. I think that if there's no third person, he says, I still don't, it's not mine until I actually get it. So he would still have the,
So
not
so
as
that's
bad. I mean,
not,
something could happen in between. This is what Reuven says, I'm giving it to you. He doesn't say anything now. And then in the meantime, this product, whatever it is, he's got an orchard full of fruits, and the beetles attack it. He said, "Listen, you okay? I don't want it now. I didn't. It's not mine until I actually get it. And 2 months later, they're all attacked by beetles. So it's not the same product anymore. So why wouldn't he have also the right then to scream and
So
repeat the
again,
effort?
that's a lot of different issues here. But the bottom line is, let me say it simply, forget about the Beatles for a second.
I understand, but again, what could be any example?
The bottom line is that if a person says to someone else, I want to give you a gift, and the person is quiet and doesn't object, and then later when it comes time to give it to him, he says, I don't want it. What we're saying in our Gemara, according to the way we're reading it, is that we don't believe that he never wanted it. We think he did want it and he changed his mind. But the fact is that since he wanted it originally, the fact that he changed his mind later does not absolve him of the gift. It's his. Like I said, he can always give it away or deal with it, but you're right. It might be a hard situation to deal with. And so the fact that he was quiet is viewed as acquiescence and changing his mind later rather than he never ever agreed to it and was never owned by him.
Right, I can understand that, but so why would that be different than the a third party in between? Because the third party, are we saying that the third he doesn't acquire until it's actually in his possession?
No, we're saying by the third party that it could very well be that from the second that Reuven said, I want to give this to you, Shimon said, no way in hell, I don't want this thing. But I don't need to object until it becomes someone comes to talk to me. So that we assume, according to Shimon Gamliel, that he never, that's what the words he uses, Hochiach sofo al tchilato. What he did in the end reveals to us what he was thinking in the beginning. So we can assume, we can make an assumption that he never wanted it. The reason he didn't say anything, because earlier we said you have to say something. Here he was like, he's not even talking to me. I'm not even part of this transaction. I don't need to say anything. It's below my stature. It's I don't need to get involved. When it comes time to talk to me, I'll get involved. But for now, they could say anything they want about me. I'm not part of it.
So certainly if he's not in the room,
Yeah, but that's
right?
not, there's no discussion if he's not in the room, because then of course not. But let's continue. Tanur Rabbanan, we're the first line, 15 lines from the bottom. Says the Braita. What if you have a shchiv mirah? So again, we've been a whole parak. We're talking about a person who's dying, who's giving out his possessions. So of course, the normal way is there's Yerusha. It goes to the children equally. The Bukhar gets double, right? But this shchiv mirah wants to designate certain things. So the shchiv mirah Sha'amari says, look, Tanuma times Zuz Laploni, right? I've got, let's just say, we're going to see 900 Zuz in this calculation. Give 200 to the first guy, to Reuven. Shlosh meot Laploni, give 300 to Shimon. Arba meot Laploni, give 400 to the next guy, okay? So he dies, and he leaves 900 Zuz, he leaves 200 to one person, 300 to another person, 400 to the next person in his list. Now, after he dies, right, they put up a note that he died, and a guy comes to court and says, well, this guy who died owed me 100 zuz, right? I'll pick 90, it's a little easier. This guy owed me 90 zuz, right? So the question is, who of these people who inherited or were given gifts have to give that 90 zuz, right? So do you say, you don't say, you don't say that Kol HaKodem B'shtar Zocheh, that the order that he was saying it was an order of Kedima, meaning the first 200 should go to Ruvain, then 300 to Shimon, then 400 to Levi, in which case the last 400 are the ones that should pay off the debt. You don't say that. Ella, what you say is that they're all given equally. The fikach yatsa alav shtarchov. Therefore, if someone comes in with a debt, govemi kulam, he collects equally from all of them. No, not equally, proportionally for all of them, right? So you don't say that the dying man wanted to give it first to Reuven, then to Shimon, then whatever's left goes to Levi. And therefore, Levi's the last on the list, and all the creditors go to Levi. We say he gave it to all of them together, and one got 20%, one got 30%, one got 40%. So that's how much you pay of the debt, but you can collect from all of them. Aval, says the Braita, this is all in the Tosefta, Aval Amar, but if the person who's dying says specifically those words, and he says, Tanil Matayim Zuz Laploni, look, I want to make sure you give 200 zuz to my good friend Reuven. And if there's anything left, acharav, after that, meaning once that's been done, I want you to give to Laploni, to the next one, and acharav Laploni. Well, then you say, clearly there is an order in the way he's giving it away. Omrim, you say that kol hakodem mishtar zucheh. Whoever's mentioned first in the shtar, meaning in the shtar you write when the person dies, saying what his estate is, the one who's mentioned first gets it first. Lefikach yatsa lav shtarchov. Therefore, if a debt comes on the estate, govem min ha'acharon, you would collect from the last one. If the debt was 200, the last one got 200, he would lose his whole Yerusha. Ein lo, let's say he doesn't have enough, right? Let's say the debt is 300, then the last one only got 200, then govem mishel lefanav. You would go to the one preceding him. Ein lo, if that's not enough, you would keep going back. Govem mishel lefanav, you would go to the one preceding that one. But there would be a order to the Yerusha only if you said the words acharav. Otherwise, if a person's dying and they just say three people, we assume it's all together. It's just you picked an order. Tanu Rabbanan. Now continues the Braita with another.
But why does the Gemara pick this way? Why not say he takes from the first one first? If he doesn't say it, if he doesn't give an order, why won't say take and set it from the last one first? That the person who has the chob. Why won't we say? I mean, I'm just curious. It could be you just take it the other way. That they take from initially, and the first person loses, not the last one.
Well, I mean, look, I think the way we're viewing this is two ways. It's either an order or it's all together. If it's all together, they all pay together, right? If it's an order, then you gave it away in order. So first you gave away part A, then you gave away part B, and then the last thing you had was part C. So that's what you collect from. It's the same way if you sell possessions, it always goes to the later person, right? If I owe a debt of $1 million and I sell my house and then I sell my office building and then I sell my car, the debtors can't collect the house. They have to go to the last thing I sold, right? Because at the time that I sold the house, I still had an office building left for someone to collect from. Anyway, so that's the
No, but they haven't sold anything. Why? I would think it could be that the debtors come first before the Yusha. They come to the bank comes and says, you owe me X amount of money. The bank says to the state, they owe me X amount of money. You pay off the debts first. And then what's remaining goes to the Yorshim.
So that's true.
That's the point. It's not Yorshim. These are gifts before he dies.
Right, but no, but to answer your point, that is what happens. The question is when now initially there was 900. You said, well, you have 200, 300, and 400. The bank came and said, wait a second, we get 500. So there's only 400 left. The question is what happens to the 400? So what we're saying is that 200 still goes to the first guy, and then 200, how much is left? Whatever. 200 goes to the second guy, because that's the order that you said it in, only if you said the words acharecha, right? That there's an order. If you didn't say that, then we assume you want to give, whatever 20 out of 900 is, 20 out of 90. I'm not so good at math, 18%, whatever, to the first guy. No, more than that, 25% to the first guy, etc. So that is the debate. Continues the bright to Tanu Rabbanan. Where are we up to? Sorry, it's hard for me to follow. It's 7 lines from the bottom. Tanu Rabbanan. What if a person is dying? Shchiv mirash amar tnu matayim zuz leploni b'ni bechor. Give 200 zuz to my firstborn, who's the bechor, right? Kira oilo, as is appropriate for him. So the question then is, these extra words, kira oilo, what do they mean, right? Do they mean that he deserves 200 and that's the amount? Or, as we say, notlan, in fact, what it really means is notlan, he gets the 200 zuz and he gets his bechor. Because basically what we think you mean to say is, give him 200 zuz extra, and give him the re'oilo, give him what his portion was normally supposed to be. Because otherwise, why say anything? But im amar, if the dying person said, bibichorato, give him 200 zuz as his bichor, as his portion of the bichor, right? Then yado al yona. Then he's got a choice, the son. He can either say, look, I either can get my bichor or I can get 200. And so I get to decide which one's greater. Ratzah notlan, if he wants, he can take them, or Ratzah notah b'chorato, or he can get his bechor. Basically, the dying father was saying, look, he can get 200 zuz as his bechor. That's an option. He doesn't have to accept it. He can say, I don't want it. I want to just take my bechor, because we assume that's what the father meant. No, because we have to say that. The shchiv mirash amar. Now, if the dying person said the same language about his wife, right? Tnu matayim zuz leploni ishti. Give 200 zuz to my wife, whatever. Kir ra'oila, as she is ra'oit again. Now remember, a wife always gets a ketubah, which happens to be 200 zuz, right? So then says the Braita notelatan, she gets the 200 zuz, and she gets an extra 200 for a ketubah. Because we're assuming that he's saying both things. He's saying, give her an extra gift of 200, and give her the portion that she is supposed to get. But im amar biktubata, if he said, give her 200 zuz as her ketubah, then yado al yonah. Turn the page again to Kuf Lamed Chet. Then Yado al Yonah, then she, just like the son, she has the superior position. She can either say, I'll take that 200, and that's my ketubah. But Ratzah notel ketubah, let's say her ketubah was much more than that, or there was more money for her ketubah, then she can accept her ketubah instead. Final, third case. We're in that second line, right, of Daf Kuf Lamed Chet Amud Bet. Shchiv Mira Shamar, if the person's dying and he says, Stuma times was the Ploni Bal Chovi, right? I borrowed money from Jeff, give him 200 zuz and give him, or I say Kira Oilo, as I owe him. So the same thing is true. It's not instead of the debt. It's that you want to give him a gift, you like the guy, and you give him back his debt. Sounds a little bit like interest, but let's assume it's not. Notlan, he takes the gift, v'notel tchovo, and he gets his debt. But again, im amar bichovo, right? If you said, I want to give it to him as in replacement for the debt I owe him, then notlan bichovo. Then he takes it as payment for the debt, right? Now, ask the Gemara, I don't understand. This Rashi understands could be a question sort of on all of them, right? All three cases. Ask the Gemara now, Mishum da Amar Kira Oilo, right? When you said to the person, it is what I owed him. So then you say, Notlan v'notel tchovo. How could you say that if I say, I want you to give 200 zuz to my debtor, Ruvain, as Kira Oilo, as is appropriate for him? Why do you say that I have to give him 200 zuz and give him the debt? Maybe what I meant to say was, as I owe him for his debt, meaning maybe it's in fact what I was trying to say. And again, in theory, ask this question for all of them, right? Maybe I was saying to the person that instead I owe my wife a ketubah, I owe my oldest son a bechor. I want to give them this money as that portion. Same thing about a debtor. So how do you know that's not what the person meant? Amar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, Amar li Huna, Huna explained to me, Rav Huna explained to me that this Braita is going according to Rabbi Akiva. This is a little bit of a full circle to much, much earlier in the Masechta, like 60, 80 pages ago. Hamani Rabbi Akiva. This is Rabbi Akiva, who always is dayek l'shna yitira. Rabbi Akiva always says that when a person uses unnecessary words, a person uses extra language in their statement or in their shtar, it's meant to teach you something specific, because otherwise you would not have said it. It's not. And this was something, we had this discussion based on a Mishnah on Daf Samach Dalid many, many weeks ago. Remember, if you guys recall, the Mishnah was, if I sell a person a house, right, it does not include, let's read the Mishnah. Lo et habor, it does not include the pit. Lo et hadut, it doesn't include the cistern, is how we translated it. Remember we had earlier, one was lined with cement and one was not lined. But either way, you have this beautiful, nice container of a storage container for water in your courtyard. If you sell the house, you don't sell that container. And said the Mishnah, Af al pisha katavlo umka varuma, even though you wrote in the shtar, I'm selling you the entire depth and width of the house. It's the house. It doesn't include the pit, right? Now, that means that the seller still owns the pit. But continue the Mishnah. How does the seller get to his pit that's in the middle of somebody else's yard now? He has to buy a path to get to his pit. Otherwise, Reuven might own a pit in the middle of Shimon's yard, but there's no way to get there, right? So different Rabbi Akiva. Again, we're not.
There's a machloket of ayin yafa versus ayin lo yafa.
Keep going. We're going to keep getting there. So mocher ba'ayin yafa, correct. So says Rabbi Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva says you have to buy a path. The Chachamim omrim, and the Chachamim said, Eino tzarich likach lo derech, right? You don't have to buy a path. That the fact is that if you sold a house, but you retained the pit for yourself, you also retained the path for yourself. And this, as we discussed earlier, mocher ba'ayin yafa, mocher ba'ayin ra'ah, that's the machloket Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. That's not why we're quoting it here. It continues the Mishnah earlier, Modeh Rabbi Akiva admits to the Chachamim that in fact you don't have to buy a path, right? Bisman sh'amar lo chutz mi'elu. If you said to someone, here, Shimon, buy my estate from me, and I'm selling you my estate except for the pit, except for the bar, then that language is extra. Because as we all said, if you just sell an estate, it doesn't include the bar. So why in the world did you say in the contract, I'm selling it to you except for the bar? It must be that I'm saying extra words in order to say, not only do I want to retain the bar, but I want to retain a pathway to the bar, right? Says the Mishnah, she'eino tzarich likach lo derech. If you say chutz mi'elo, you don't have to buy a pathway. Alma, what do you see from that? That kivan de lo tzarich v'ka'amar, since you didn't need to say this, right? It was understood that if you sold a house, you're not selling the bar, but you said it anyways. then clearly your point in saying it is to add some information. L'tfuye miltakat, you're trying to add something to the issue. In that case, you're adding that you want to get the way to the bar. Hanami, here too, we assume that when a person says, right, to his bechor, a person is dying and he says, I want my wife to have her ketubah, that should be obvious, right? You don't need to say, I want her to have 200 zuz for her ketubah, right? Because she's going to get her ketubah. So since you said something that was extra, and the same is true about a bachor, the same is true about a son, kivan de lo tzarech, since you didn't need to say this because you already owed the money to that person, right? You owe the bechor, you owe your wife the ketubah, you owe the bachor the debt. But you said it, you're not saying, I want to give 200 as the debt. You're saying, L'tfuye milta ka'ati, you're trying to add something. You're trying to give an additional gift, and therefore saying, as we said in the Breita, here, you get a gift, plus I owe you the debt. You get a gift, plus you get your bechora. And so that's how we understand it, according to Rabbi Akiva. Now,
So in that case,
Yeah.
Regarding Rabbi Akiva, he didn't say that. I mean, he said something extra, so he did not. So then the buyer did not get access. Is that right?
No, the opposite. Because you said something extra,
The buyer did get access.
sorry, no. The buyer never gets access. The seller not only retains the bar, but retains a pathway to the bar. Because the seller said, I'm selling you the house except for the bar, which should be obvious. Why'd you say that? Because you're trying to say, and I want to get to the bar, meaning I need you to give me space to get there.
So he automatically retains
Correct.
access. He can walk to it.
He
He
gets a
doesn't have to
pathway.
pay for it. He doesn't have to pay back the buyer to get access.
Correct. Tanu Rabbanan. Let's get to the two dots in the middle of the page. We'll get to the Mishnah, maybe even two Mishnayot. Says the Breita, one last sort of halacha for today, at least, about a shchiv meirah. Shchiv meirah shamar. Let's say a person's dying. This is all from the Tosefta, right? A person is dying, and remember, up till now, we've talked about the person is dying, and they're saying, I want to give away, my diamond ring should go to this person, and $200 should go to that person, and you're giving away things. But, sometimes when people die, they also have to admit what they owe, right? So let's say along the list of what you're giving away, you say, oh, and I owe $1,000 to this guy and $10,000 to that guy, and I never paid off my debt from this thing. So you say what you owe, not what you're giving, right? So let's say you say, Shchiv meirah amar, mana yesh li eitzel ploni, right? I take it back. This is not, it's the opposite. You say, not I owe someone else owes me money. Okay, so both are true, but this is what you're saying here. Mana yeshli eitzel ploni. I am owed $100 by somebody else. Okay, so I gave money. I never got to collect it. I'm unfortunately dying now. I'm never going to get to. I want you to know that, Ruvain has $100 of mine. So now, of course, Ruvain's not there. There's no star about this. Obviously you can't collect from Ruvain just because you say I lent Ruvain $100, right? But says the Breita, but the witnesses who are listening to the last will and testament of the Shchiv meirah and writing down, give one field to Ruvain and one field to Shimon, they can write this down. Ha'edim kotvin, they can write down that on his deathbed, this dying man said that that Ruvain owes him $100. Now, Afalpi, Shein Makirim, even though they don't know anything about the debt, right? They have no knowledge about it. They don't see a star. The person's not there, right? Because why can they write it down? They can write it down, says the Breita, because this is just the statement of a dying man. So if you bring this to court and we say the dying man said Reuven owed him $100, right? Reuven can say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? So the only way it's just information that you can then look for a star, look for proof, try to find witnesses, but you're obviously not going to collect it based on what's written down in the star. Lefikach, and it's a little bit catch-22. Therefore, says the Breita, Kishu Goveh, when they actually take the estate and they try to collect from Ruvain and say, oh, Ruvain, you owe the state $100 million, tzarich lahavi ra'aya, you have to prove that, right? Because the fact that it's written down doesn't prove anything. They write down whatever the dying man says, right? So they'll write down things with no proof. So the fact that it's written down is not proof. You'd have to bring external proof in order to collect from Ruvain. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say that's really slippery. You really shouldn't write it down. Ein kotvin elim kein makirim. You never write things down that someone says that someone else owes me money in a star unless he can actually bring documents, unless or the people in the room understand and they were there and they have witnesses, right? But you never write something down unless you know it's true. And therefore, lefikach kishu goveh, if you did write it down and he comes to court to adjudicate the estate and the will, ein tzarich lavi raya. You can trust the document at face value. This star of the death of a shchiv mirah, which is signed by two witnesses, says that Ruvain owes him his estate $100. That's proof that Ruvain owes him $100 because the witnesses would not have written it down unless they had proof that it was true. And so therefore, obviously, you have to know how you paskin, right? According to Rabbi Meir, you don't write it down because, I'm sorry, according to Rabbi Meir, you write it down even without proof, but that means that what's written is not something you can rely on. And according to Chachamim, you would only write it down if you had proof. So if it was written, it's true. If it's not written, you don't have to deal with it. Now,
What's the proof they have? Do they have the star?
whatever proof, you either have witnesses or a star. Yeah.
So
Or
if that's the
or
case,
or
though,
Shimon, or the person's there and he admits it. I mean, whatever it is, right?
well, okay. So in that case, if they go to court, they say this is the star we had at the time. I mean,
Obviously, of course, but the point is, let's say that they don't. Do they have to bring an additional raya to what's written here? Maybe they lost the star, but maybe Reuven was in the room and Reuven said it was true. Or so, anyways, Amr of Nachman. Now, said Rav Nachman, Amr Lihuna. Remember, we had this statement, same language before. Rav Huna said to me, Tana, you know what you should say in the Braita is Rabbi Meir Omer Ein Kotvin. Rabbi Meir says not to write it down, right? Because basically they can't write it down unless they can prove that it's true. And therefore, what Rabbi Meir is saying, this is very similar. So this is the opposite, right? The way we had in our Braita was that Rabbi Meir said, that you can write it down even if you don't recognize it. And here, Rav Nachman said that Rav Huna told him that's the opposite. Rabbi Meir says, don't write it down. And the Chachamim Omrim Kotvim. The rabbi said, you can write it down, meaning you don't have to prove it, you can just write it down. Ve'af Rabbi Meir lo amar el mishum beitin to'in. And the reason Rabbi Meir said don't write it down is not because if you write it down, it's going to be proof. Everybody understands that if you write it down, it's not going to be proof. Because the fact is that someone's dying, all you're doing in a shtar of a shchiv mirah, you're saying, we were at the deathbed of Ploni Almoni, and these are the things he told us. Nobody thinks that that's proof. He told us he wants to give his diamond ring to so-and-so and his car to so-and-so, and that Shimon owes him $1,000. But that's not proof. So why does Rabbi Meir say not to write it down? Because Af Rabbi Meir lo amar mishum beitin to'im. Rabbi Meir is worried that the next court is going to make a mistake. That writing it down is, everybody should know, if you learn Daf Yomi, that in fact, just because it's written in a shtar of a shchiv mirah is not proof. But a court might forget. The court might not make it realize. They might say, oh, this is a great shtar. It's got two witnesses. It's very official. And they might take it at face value. And Amar Rav Dimi min Hardai, says Rav Dimi min Hardai, Hilchata, the halacha is ein choshishin lebeitin to'in. You don't really have to worry about a beitin making this kind of mistake. This is an elementary detail. The fact that something is written down in a shtar of a saying of a shchiv mirah is not proof of anything, right? It's just proof that this is what the shchiv mirah said on his deathbed. It does not prove that anyone owes him money. And you don't have to worry about that. So that's Gemara, is that really true? You don't have to worry that beitin will confuse something. What about my shna midirava? There was a very, very famous case of Rava. Where are we? We are, I'd say 8 lines from the bottom. Maishnami de Rava. Dama Rava. Rava said something very, very fascinating, right? Let's say a person comes to court and they say, look, I'm from Boston and I need to do chalitza, okay? And I need you to observe it. I want you to watch the chalitza. My name is so-and-so. And, the brother of the deceased man does chalitza. And, I'm not from around here. They don't know who these people are. But he says, I'm Shimon, and I want to do chalitza. So can the court write down and say, a man named Shimon came in front of us, and there was a woman named Sarah, and he gave chalitza to her. Says Rava, you should never do that. Ein choltzin elim kein makirin. You should never observe and write down that you watched the chalitza unless you know that the people there are who they say they are. If you don't makir them, if you don't recognize them, and they're strangers, they tell you who they are, that's a problem, because then it could be that they're hired actors, right? Or they're fooling you, and they're doing it in your court. They're then going to go back home to their court in Boston and say, look, I have a document that says I did chalitza, when in fact, maybe it wasn't the woman at all, or it wasn't the guy at all. And continues Rava, the same thing is true about miyun. Remember, miyun is a girl who's married off by her mother or her brothers when she's a minor. And then she can come to court at the age of 12 or a majority and say, I don't want to be part of this marriage. So the girl shows up and she says, I'm so-and-so, I don't want to be part of the marriage. The Beit Din doesn't just document and say, so-and-so came into our court and did this and give her a shtar unless they know who the person is. The Fikach Kotvin, therefore, says Rava, you can write a get chalitza, a get miyun, afal b'sheina makirim. You can write a get meaning a second court, can write a get chalitza and a get miun, meaning they can write a get here means a document, right? A document attesting that someone had chalitza or had miun, even if they don't know who the people are, because as long as they have a first court that said a document says a person did chalitza or miun, they can assume that the court would not have validated it unless they knew the people, right? And so basically, you're relying on you're relying on a court verifying before they write something down. So since
Why is it necessary to do it twice?
I guess you're in a different city, right? You go somewhere else.
Once it's done, it's done. Why do they have to do it again?
Because later in life, right, 5 years later, this woman comes and says, I'm ready to get married. And people say, wait a second, how can you get married? You were married when you were 8 years old. And she says, well, it's true. I was married when I was 8 years old, but I did mi'un. I'm no longer married. So the new court has to establish the facts, right? Is she allowed to get married? So they can allow her to get married. Basically, can assume she did mi'un based on the document from the earlier court. Because, as Rava said, the earlier court would never do something unless they could verify it. Right? My time, why would the earlier court never do something unless they could verify it? La mishum dechoshishin the beit din to'in, because they are really worried that a second beit din would make a mistake. Meaning, because the alternative would be that the first court says, "Look, we'll verify this. We'll write it down, not verify it. We'll write down that this woman came in front of us to do mi'un, but we'll leave it up to the second court to figure out was that woman in fact the same person." Right? It must be that you don't rely on a second court to figure that out because you're worried about Beit Din To'in, about Beit Din mistakenly saying something's okay when it's not. And so therefore, the first court has to make sure that's 100% verified. So you see that you do worry that a later court's going to rely on an earlier court, and you don't let an earlier court do something that could be misconstrued. It says we're low.
The question is, why does the second court have to do it again?
Because she's getting married in a different town. And people are
They
asking.
do the same ceremony again?
Not the same ceremony. You write a document that says that it was done, but they have to verify it was done. Unfortunately, or you could say fortunately, but this happens in Israel every day, right? That if a person goes to the Rabbanut to get married, they verify that the person was in fact divorced or Jewish or whatever they try to verify. So it must be that you worry about Beit Din To'in. So that's very low. It's not the case. That's a very different case because there it's a Beit Dina, Batra Beit Dina. It's one court after another court. There, they're going to give a lot of leniency to the first court, lo daiki, and they're not so careful. So a court has to be very, very confident when they write something down because a subsequent court might not question the veracity. But Beidina Batar Edim Daiki. But if witnesses say something and then it comes to a court, the court is very much going to verify that what the witnesses said is true. And so you don't have to have the same level of accuracy by witnesses as you have by a court, because with witnesses, we know you're going to ask questions. By a court, no one's going to ask questions. I think we should stop there. I wanted to do the Mishnah, but I think that we're out
So
of
they're not going to have questions regarding a court? So they're going to assume the first court did everything they had to do.
And therefore, the first court has to do everything they can do, right? So the first court cannot write down anything unless they are 100% sure that what they're saying is true, because a later court is in fact going to take them at face value. So you do not assume that there's something called Beit Din To'in after one Beit Din, but you can assume that there is a mistake after a din. So it's a machloket, but that's how we come out.
You got to go.
Okay, everyone. I think we're going to have to
You got to go now.
stop here. Everyone have a wonderful week. We'll pick it up tomorrow from the Mishnah. Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Shabbat.